This is the worst building in New York City. Just kidding. It's actually one of the best. But today, we're talking about the history of architecture in New York, and it is a long history that goes back hundreds of years before the city was even called New York. So let's take a walk through its history, starting with its very first architectural masterpiece. Welcome to this house. I'm your host. Today we are exploring the great houses of New York. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. So the first structure that could be considered a masterpiece of architecture in what would become New York City was built by the Dutch West India Company right here in 1631. This fort was called Fort Amsterdam, and it was made up of simple wooden buildings. The settlement had been named New Amsterdam, and it was located on the southern tip of Manhattan. But over time, the town expanded north into what is now Lower Manhattan. As the settlement grew, the original fort became surrounded by the town, and thus it was torn down in 1654 to make way for new development. And while we don't have any photos of what the fort looked like, we do know that the company spent about 7,500 guilders on its construction. And since one guilder is equivalent to roughly $200, we can estimate that the fort costs around $1.5 million to build in today's money. The location of the fort is now occupied by the statue of George Washington. In 1658, a new church was constructed at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets. And this was a significant moment in the city's history, because it was the first brick building erected in New York. You see, up until this point, all of the structures in the city were made from wood, which obviously is unto the best material when you're reliving in a place like New York where fires are common. Bricks, however, are far more fire-resistant, and so they were used to construct the walls of the church, while the roof and floors were still made out of wood. The Dutch Reformed Church was designed by architect Johannes B. van Vleck, and it had a simple yet elegant design. Its most striking feature was its tall spire, which served as a symbol of the city for many years. Unfortunately, the church was destroyed in a fire in 1776 during the American Revolution. The British troops set fire to the city as they retreated, and the church was one of the many buildings that were lost. But the church was rebuilt after the war, and it continued to stand until the early 20th century, when it was demolished to make way for a new office building. Another important Dutch colonial-era building was the city's first town hall, which was built in 1665. The building was a simple rectangular structure with a low-pitched roof. It was made of brick and had a single room with a fireplace at one end. The building served as the city's government center, as well as a meeting place for the local militia. In 1679, a clock tower was added to the building, which became one of the most recognizable landmarks in the city. Fortunately, the building was destroyed in the same fire. It destroyed the Dutch Reformed Church in 1776. The Trinity Church is the oldest Anglican church in New York City, and it's also the second oldest in continuous use in the United States after St. Philip's Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Construction began in 1697, but the church wasn't completed for another 40 years. The church was designed by architect William during the Revolutionary War. The British used the church as a stable for their horses, and it suffered some damage. However, it was repaired after the war and has remained an active place of worship ever since. The merchant's house was built in 1703 for Samuel Vernon, a wealthy merchant and one of the founders of the New York Stock Exchange. The house was designed by architect Frederick Delp and was one of the first mansions in the city. The house featured a lavish interior with intricate wood carvings and imported Dutch furniture. Unfortunately, the house was destroyed in a fire in 1776. The Federal Hall was built in 1703 and served as the capital of New York for several decades. It was also the site of George Washington's first inauguration as President of the United States in 1789. The building was later used as a courthouse and then as a custom house. It's now a national monument and a museum. But perhaps no other house from this period is as important as the Morris Jumel Mansion. This house was the home of several prominent figures in American history, including George Washington, Aaron Burr, and Alexander Hamilton. It was also the site of a famous duel between those two in 1804. The mansion was built in 1765 for wealthy merchant Roger Morris and his wife, Elizabeth. The house was designed in the Georgian style and featured a lavish interior with decorated ceilings and imported European furniture. After Roger died, his widow married Aaron Burr, and during their time in the house, Aaron planned his famous trip to explore the Louisiana Purchase. When he returned, he learned that his wife's cousin, Alexander Hamilton, had accused him of treason and had challenged him to a topless hat. The two duelists met at Weehawken, New Jersey, and Burr shot and killed Hamilton. After this, Burr fled to Europe, and he lived in exile for several years. When he returned to the United States, he was tried for murder, but was acquitted. He then sold the house and moved to New Orleans, where he spent the remainder of his life. The townhouse was purchased by John J. Jr., who added a third story to the house, and it passed to his daughter Eliza and her husband Stephen K. Jumel, hence the house's current name. In 1810, General Lafayette visited the house, and he was so impressed with it that he called it the Palace of New York. The house has since been restored to its 1799 appearance and is open to the public as a museum. The rise of skyscrapers in New York City did not happen overnight. It was the result of a gradual process that occurred over several decades. The first step in this process was the invention of the elevator in 1853 by American inventor Elisha Graves Otis. Prior to this invention, the majority of buildings in New York and other cities were limited to just a few stories in height, because it was difficult to transport people and goods. 2 upper floors without the use of machines. But with the invention of the elevator, this problem was solved. Another important innovation was the introduction of steel frame construction in the 1860s. Steel was a much stronger and more durable material than the cast iron that had been used for building frames up until that point. This innovation allowed for the construction of taller buildings that could withstand the wind loads and other stresses that are placed on skyscrapers. One of the earliest skyscrapers in New York City was the Home Insurance Building, which was completed in 1857. It was only 4 stories tall, but it was the first building in the city to use a steel frame for support. Another early skyscraper was the Manhattan Life Insurance Building, which was completed in 1866. It was the first building in the city to have an elevator. However, the true beginning of the skyscraper era in New York City is generally considered to be the completion of the first World Trade Center in 1973. At the time, it was the tallest building in the world. It stood at a height of 1,137 feet or 350 meters. It was followed in 1970 by the completion of the second tallest building in the world, the World Trade Center. These 2 buildings symbolized the growing importance of New York City as a global financial center. They also represented the incredible engineering and architectural achievements of the time. After the turn of the century, New York saw a building boom like never before. Many of the most famous skyscrapers in the city were completed during this time, including the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, the Flatiron Building, and the Woolworth Building. The Chrysler Building was the tallest building in the world from 1930 to 1931, until it was surpassed by the Empire State Building. But both of these buildings remain iconic symbols of New York City's skyline, and it's hard to imagine the city without them. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Which era of New York architecture is your favorite? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. I would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. I'll see you next time.